Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Empower Illinois Strategies to Reduce Nutrient Pollution and Protect Waterways. Today's webinar is part of the Everyday Environment webinar series, which is offered on the second Thursday of each month. I'm Amanda, and I will be moderating today. This webinar will be recorded, and the recording will be shared to the Illinois Extension YouTube page. Please allow time for processing and closed captioning. You will receive an email when the video is posted. Please feel free to type any questions into the chat. We will take questions at the end of the webinar. We have closed captioning enabled, and you can control whether you see the captioning in the Zoom control bar on your screen. Today, we have a team of speakers from Illinois Extension Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy Team. This includes myself, Joan Cox, Rachel Curry, and Eliana Brown. We are excited to share our knowledge with you today. We hope that you leave today with an understanding of how you can help support our environment every day. We will look at how cities, farming communities, and everywhere in between can come together to improve water quality in their own unique ways. Chances are that you've experienced a walk in the prairie, a stomp in the creek, or a conservation field day. If so, you have been involved in waterway protection, even if it wasn't obvious. Implementing practices such as perennial plantings, cover cropping, and stream monitoring are all essential to meeting our nutrient loss reduction goals. And those are just a few examples. Nutrient pollution is a water quality issue throughout the state. At Extension, we believe that education is basic in stimulating individual initiative, self-determination, and leadership, that these are keys to democracy, and that people, when given facts they understand, will not only act in their self-interest, but also in the interest of society. We hope to give you those facts today so you can take them and move into action. We challenge you to understand more about the problem, observe your local environment, reach out to learn more about what interests you, connect with other people in your community, make your own conclusions, and act in whatever capacity makes sense to you. So, I wonder, do you know where your water flows? Now we will do a quick poll. On your screen, 2 questions should pop up. I will pause for a few seconds while you select your answers. Do you know where your water supply originates? And do you know where it goes when it leaves your home? Yes, no, somewhat? All right. Thank you all for participating in our poll today. It's fascinating to see the diversity of our knowledge about our drinking water and where it goes to use it. Whether you answered yes, no, or somewhat, it's clear that we all have different levels of awareness about this critical aspect of our daily lives. Understanding the journey of our water is key to appreciating the systems that support our everyday needs and fostering a more sustainable relationship with our environment. Now I will turn it over to Joan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Joan Cox. I'm going to give a little bit of a background on watersheds, nutrient pollution problem, and sources. So, where does our water come from? Groundwater sources from shallow or deep aquifers in Illinois feed rural wells in many villages and cities across the state. Some cities use surface water, such as Danville, Decatur, Springfield, and Bloomington Normal. And if you live in the Chicago region, you may get your water from a variety of sources, depending on where you are. So there's surface intakes on Lake Michigan. Another surface water source is the Fox River or the Kankakee River. And there's also groundwater sources as well. And where does your water go? Well, we're talking here about rainwater and wastewater. So let's focus on rain first. Spring is on its way. It rains a lot here in Illinois. When it rains, you might think of your gutters filling up, needing to be cleaned out, or maybe you won't think about it too much, but that water goes somewhere. It might go down your driveway into a drain. It might go down the street into a ditch. Either way, those are ending up in little creeks, down into rivers, eventually to the ocean. If your wastewater, and then we've got wastewater, and wastewater travels from your home to the wastewater treatment plant where it's cleaned and discharged into a creek or river. So ultimately, whether we're talking about runoff from rain over surfaces or whether it's wastewater from your home making way into a river, we have, they're both going into rivers and down to the ocean. So this is a tool that can be used to visualize where your water goes. We're going to show a clip here from where water goes from the U of I campus in Champaign-Urbana. First, it travels, off of buildings into a storm system, into Boneyard Creek, and then discharges into the Salt Creek of the Vermilion River. It's headed east here through a lot of farm ground. You can see some towns along the way. We're getting close. The city work that's coming up is Danville. It turns south at Danville. Eventually that river dumps into the Wabash, then the Ohio, and then the Mississippi down to the Gulf. So we're going to send this link, and there's some other resources that are really nice for showing how where your water goes, who your upstream neighbors are, who your downstream neighbors are, and those will be in the resources that get sent out after this webinar. So what is a watershed? Well, it's an area of land that drains to a common location. It can be as small as a building lot or larger than a state or even a country. I mean, even the Mississippi River watershed boundaries reach up into Canada. So when we protect our water, we have to start with understanding how it flows within a whole system. So in this graphic, let's say we want to figure out where the watershed draining to the red dot is. You see how the upland forest and then the farm there drain down through small creeks to the dot. Well, that is the watershed for that location at the dot. Now let's say we want to know the whole watershed coming to the river dam at the bottom of the graphic. Not only does that include that upland area to the red dot, the dam's watershed now also includes farms, additional farms, that subdivision in the middle of the graphic, the power plant, or some type of industry discharging near the dam. So all these upstream sources from the dam make up the watershed to the point of the dam. So watersheds can be small, draining into minor streams, or large, covering thousands of square miles and containing many smaller watersheds within them. And I want to mention here too, not all water runs off the surface. Some soaks into the ground and flows through groundwater along similar slopes. That groundwater can even feed streams, base flow. It can also infiltrate and fill aquifers, shallow or deep aquifers. So there's even directional flow underground as well. And watersheds are systems. So everything in the system is connected, and watersheds provide us with a lot of services: drinking water, industrial and agricultural supply, recreation, fishing, aquatic life. The ways we use and manage the land can have an impact on the water quality and quantity in the watershed. Some of you may have seen this Major Watersheds of Illinois map by the Illinois State Water Survey. It shows watershed boundaries. The map uses different colors to show the large watersheds in the state, and then different lightness or darkness shades of a color to show all the smaller watersheds within those larger ones. So Illinois River, for example, is a greenish shades. All the green shades show the sub-watersheds that contribute water to the Illinois River. And I've shown here with light blue lines how the rivers of those smaller watersheds flow in to the Illinois River. And then we're going to zoom in on this yellow box area to talk briefly about local scale watersheds. Okay, first major principle of a watershed approach is that it's place-based. Do you see the red X? Okay, that's a farm that sits right on top of a border of two watersheds. So it's sitting up on a ridge. These boundaries, all these boundary lines you see on this map are high spots. So when it rains on this X, on this farm, the rain actually falling on the west side of the farm flows down into the Sangamon Valley. And if I walk about 200 feet over to the east, the rain on that side of the farmstead is flowing down into the Vermilion River. I use this example to illustrate, this could be the same for any type of city, village. There's the boundaries of watersheds have nothing to do with our human imprints on the land. They don't follow our political or our jurisdictional boundaries. And this means, second, that the scale of the planning that has to happen in the management has to match the scale of the watershed. So here's highlighted the Vermilion River to the Wabash. This is a nitrate priority watershed within Illinois. It contains a lot of agricultural land, many small villages, and the city of Danville, which gets its water from the reservoir, like Vermilion, fed by the flow from the North Fork of the Vermilion River. And based on an inventory and assessment of water quality problems in this watershed, the planning group has three main goals: reduce nitrate levels below the drinking water standard, so that's 10 parts per million or 10 milligrams per liter, decrease algal blooms, and reduce sedimentation in the lake. So those goals and the plans and the funding that follows in this watershed is directed toward activities and land management practices that will do that, and it has a lot of partners working together. A reason the watershed scale matters is because watersheds cross, again, city, county, state lines. So management based on political boundaries would be pretty inefficient and ineffective. Okay, to see the footprint, how the footprint of Illinois is connected to the bigger picture, we see here that Illinois is a part of the Mississippi River Basin. This drains about 40% of the US. All of the water in Illinois ends up going down the Mississippi to the Gulf of Mexico, except for a small amount of land up in the Chicagoland area that drains toward Lake Michigan. All right, so this brings us to the topic of nutrient pollution. So along the pathway of water, nutrients can be picked up from various sources and moved to our lakes and streams, causing many problems, such as harmful algal blooms and hypoxic or low oxygen conditions. Nitrogen and phosphorus are our main focus for today, and the management of these nutrients are addressed with a statewide nutrient loss reduction strategy. Harmful algal blooms can be pretty dangerous to people and animals and create dead zones in aquatic systems. These also raise treatment costs for drinking water. For example, if drinking water was over that 10 parts per million nitrate concentration, city water suppliers would need costly treatment, nitrate treatment equipment, and also to pass out bottled water. Harmful algal blooms, also called HABs, can hurt industry or basically anything that depends on clean water. And we have here at the bottom a link. If you notice an algal bloom in water near you, you can fill out this online form on the IEPA website, and they will investigate those claims that meet certain conditions. And they have a mapping platform link to that as well. So that link will be in your resources too. In addition to causing harmful algal blooms and the repercussions of those, the nutrient pollution can threaten public health by affecting drinking water through supply of groundwater that has high nitrate levels. So you don't have to have HABs to have a nitrate problem with water. But HABs do impact also property values, hinder recreational opportunities, and harm local businesses and tourism and fisheries. And because the pollution is part of the drainage system, these same problems that can occur here locally can move downstream and affect the fisheries economy and the tourism and businesses downstream in the Gulf of Mexico as well. Sources of nitrogen include agriculture. So we've got row crop, livestock agriculture, atmospheric deposition, urban runoff, point sources such as wastewater treatment plants. These are all also sources of phosphorus. And another additional source of phosphorus is stream channel erosion and natural soil deposits. we'll get more into the details about sources and solutions when Rachel and Eliana talk in a moment. So our land and water is connected, and everything that happens upstream affects everything downstream. The map here both these maps illustrate the watersheds in the Mississippi River basin that are hotspots for nitrogen and phosphorus pollution. So nutrients washing down the Mississippi River into the Gulf of Mexico create a dead zone where low oxygen levels make it impossible for many aquatic species to survive. This zone on this map you see is comparable in area to Yellowstone National Park. It peaks in the summer, affecting the seafood and tourism industries by having to make fishermen venture further offshore. And this impacts both the U.S. food supply and also many local economies. Do you enjoy seafood? Well, NOAA, that's the National Atmospheric Association, estimates that seafood and tourism industry loses $82 million annually. The Gulf hypoxia is exacerbated by factors other than human influence as well, such as weather patterns, hurricanes, water salinity. And so it highlights the broad impact of both human and natural influences on this critical environmental issue. Algal blooms are a local problem throughout Illinois, throughout the US, and throughout the world. This particular spot at the Gulf happens to be the second largest hypoxic zone in the world. And what is the US doing about the Gulf hypoxic dead zone? Well, there's collective efforts of many states down to the local level working on this, not only the big issue, but all the local ones as well. These goals are outlined here, are part of the Gulf Hypoxia Action Plan. It's from the Gulf Hypoxia Task Force, the National Task Force. And in Illinois, we're focusing on both the big picture and the local impacts. So this is about collective efforts to achieve big goals. There are things we can do individually and collectively, which we'll talk about now in light of the various nutrient pollution sources. Okay, we'll focus the rest of the webinar on nutrient sources and solutions. So focusing on point source wastewater treatment plants, then agriculture, and finally urban stormwater. Let's start with wastewater. Okay, rural areas use private wells and septic systems, but for even very small villages up to our largest cities, we have wastewater treatment plants. From our homes and businesses, our wastewater goes to a local wastewater treatment plant to be cleaned, then discharged into a local stream. Industries also have wastewater treatment and stream discharges. Wastewater plants, whether they're municipal or industrial, are very high tech. And I encourage you all to take a tour of a local plant, or if you get a chance to take a tour of a bigger plant ever. Wastewater contains nitrogen and phosphorus from human waste, food, certain soaps, and detergents. So your local wastewater plants may be working on the nutrient reduction strategy. These plants are referred to as point sources. They are regulated by the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency to meet NPDES permits. That's National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permits. So the point source sector is regulated, and billions of dollars in Illinois are going to reduce total phosphorus and nitrogen loads while also meeting other NPDES permit limits. So these facilities are undertaking very extensive construction projects every year, and the need for continued funding is expected to remain high for a while. This is funded through various sources, including private capital, state loans, customer billing. So there's a huge price that we're paying for technologies to meet the regulated permit requirements to get our water quality goals in this sector. There are various technologies, including filtration types and biological and chemical technologies that wastewater treatment plants use to optimize their nutrient reductions. Between 2019 and 2021, the EPA studied how to better remove nutrients from wastewater, focusing on advanced technologies and The national study is available here at this link if you want to learn more about wastewater technologies. So that'll be available in your resources. Also in Illinois, an example of wastewater industry partnering with the agricultural sector is in the Metropolitan Waste Reclamation District of Greater Chicago. This partnership is with University of Illinois researchers and the Illinois Farm Bureau at the research demonstration site that's owned by MWRD in Fulton County, Illinois. And scientists there are working on biochar to recycle nutrients, struvite as a slow release fertilizer, and biosolids for composting to improve soil health. So that's some of the partnership and research that's happening with wastewater and agriculture. And with that, we are going to segue to talk about agricultural sector with Rachel.
Thank you, Joan. So as what has been pointed out earlier and already, nutrient loss impacts us all, and we all have a role to play in reducing nutrient loss, whether it's from our agricultural fields, our home lawns and gardens, or our communities. And I'm going to give you some background as well as explain what is being done to reduce nutrient loss by the agricultural sector, as well as cover some considerations that play a role in the decision-making process, and then maybe some of the things that you can do to help support agricultural conservation practice adoption. While we are all stewards of the land, it is realized that ag is a large contributor of both nitrogen and phosphorus to our local water bodies, the Mississippi River and the Gulf of Mexico. This map is a model of the Mississippi River Basin, and it's looking at the total nitrogen delivered to the Gulf of Mexico. And it was part of a report that was delivered to Congress in March of 2022. And you'll notice that most of Illinois is in a dark green color, and that's indicating that a large amount of total nitrogen is leaving our state. Now, not all of this nitrogen is attributed to agriculture. Nutrient loss happens from multiple sources, including legacy nutrients, which are nutrients that are left over from previous decades. And these legacy nutrients are starting to be studied so we can get a better understanding of where they're coming from and what can be done to mitigate the loss attributed to those nutrients. This map is from the same report, but it's looking at total phosphorus. And again, Illinois contains the darker color browns, indicating that a large amount of phosphorus is leaving our state. And again, many other sources contribute to the phosphorus leaving our state, including wastewater treatment facilities and stream bank erosion. And I want to pause and take a moment to emphasize that nutrient loss is also an economic issue as well as it being an environmental issue. Fertilizers are essential to maximizing yields, but they're also very expensive. And so farmers want to keep the nutrients in their field where that farmer can then realize the return on that investment. There are a lot of agricultural conservation practices out there, and several of them are part of our nutrient loss reduction strategy. These practices can be structural, like building a terrace, or management, like adding cover crops and utilizing conservation tillage. And these are a list of in-field practices that are approved and part of our nutrient loss reduction strategy. And in-field practices are conservation practices that take place within a field. And for all of these practices, there is an estimated nutrient loss reduction for both nitrogen and phosphorus, as well as an estimated cost per acre per year. Now, to put this into a little bit of perspective, if a farmer with a 200-acre farm decided to implement a grass-based cover crop on all of their acres, according to this cost breakdown, it would cost that farmer around $6,000 a year to implement cover crops. There are also edge of field practices and land use changes that are part of our nutrient loss reduction strategy. Edge of field practices are implemented at the boundary of the field and don't typically require land to be taken out of production. Land use change is taking less productive ground out of row crop production and then transitioning it to either a perennial crop or an energy crop. Now, something to think about is that these edge of field practices can also have a limited lifetime. Bioreactors, for instance, will need to change the wood chips in them approximately every 10 years. And the average cost to install a bioreactor is typically between $15,000 and $20,000. Now, bioreactors drain a limited area, which may be a single field, and are only appropriate under certain conditions. And they also have to have a bypass to make sure that water doesn't back up in the field and impact the farmer's ability to be in their field. Now, you can learn more about the practices by going to the Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy website, listening to a podcast episode, reading one of our blogs, or reviewing the fact sheet. And the links are on this slide and will be provided later. So these practices have been put together into different scenarios to identify the adoption rate needed to achieve the goals that are outlined in our nutrient loss reduction strategy. However, there are a lot of considerations that have to be taken into account when deciding what conservation practice to adopt and where to place that practice. Now, many of these are considerations intertwined with each other, which makes it even more complex. Chris Morris, who received his PhD in rural psychology from Iowa State, was on our podcast recently to talk about barriers to conservation practice adoption. And he's also published several articles on the topic. And he says that when considering the factors that influence farmers' decisions, it's crucial to understand that farming is an enterprise that involves very high risks, and farmers often operate on extremely thin profit margins. The Iowa State and Purdue research teams have identified several common barriers associated with risk that have a negative influence on the adoption of conservation practices. The financial cost of the practices, perceived reduction in crop yields, practice compatibility with existing farming practices, the market fluctuations in crop prices, the distrust of community and government agencies, as well as neighbors' lack of success with a practice, the complicated program application process, as well as farmer uncertainty about the potential practice can all decrease the likelihood of a farmer to adopt a conservation practice. Now, most farms are family owned, and each year they are taking out huge loans to cover the cost of equipment, seed, and other inputs like fertilizers and pesticides in order to maximize their yields and try to ensure that they can repay the loan at the end of the year. Now, you're going to hear me say this often, but they're operating on very tight profit margins most years. And so oftentimes there isn't a lot of money to spend on other things like conservation practice implementation. Now, in-field practices like reduced tillage and cover crops can provide a return on that investment through improved soil health. But soil health improvements take time. Other in-field practices like nutrient management can result in less being spent on fertilizers, and so the economic returns are seen more quickly. But when we're talking about edge of field practices like saturated buffers and bioreactors, they're put in place to capture nutrients, nitrogen in particular, and to reduce nutrient loads in our local water bodies, and they don't have that kind of return. So farmers often rely on cost share programs to help offset the cost of these practices. Now, again, Chris Morris, during our podcast episode on barriers to adoption, explains that many people think that farmers are hesitant to install conservation practices due to potential yield loss and reduced income or the cost of the practice. But his research into farmer trauma has found that the reasoning goes a lot deeper than that. Due to often thin profit margins, new practices in farm management are risky, and there's that risk of catastrophic failure. And when that happens, it's more than just a loss of income, but it's potentially the loss of your way of life or the loss of land that's been in your family for generations. So you can listen to the full podcast episode with the link on the screen, and we'll also provide that later. So cost share programs are vital for ag conservation practice adoption. Now, these conservation practices are expensive, as I have tried to illustrate earlier, and farmers have to pay for them out of pocket. And so these cost share programs offer a way for part of the practice to be paid for to relieve some of that financial burden from farmers. There's a lot of interest in this, and so there's also a huge backlog due to the lack of funding for the programs, as well as lack of personnel to install the practices. In the 2023 biennial report, we found that for the Conservation Stewardship Program, or CSP, and the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, or EQIP, they had a backlog of more than $60 million in 2022 alone, and that left over 1,400 applications unfunded. So some practices can also reduce yield, even temporarily, and that impacts the overall economics of the farm, which are often already tight. Cover crops, for example, can take around 5 years depending on a lot of different conditions, weather, soil type, cover crop mix, management decisions, and so on, before a farmer can see a marked improvement in their soil health and build resiliency within their operation. Some practices, like the land use change, will take land out of production. And so that will also impact the economic returns and farmers' ability to repay loans at the end of the year. Next. Another consideration is absentee landowners. The amount of land in Illinois that's owned versus rented varies over time and is dependent on your location. But you can see that the statewide average in 2021 was that 23% of the land was owned by the farmer farming the land, compared to 77% of the land, which was either crop shared, which is where the costs and profits are divided between the landowner and the tenant, or cash rented. So the farmer pays a certain amount for each acre rented. And that can range from $58 in Southern Illinois to more than $367 in Central Illinois. The overall state average for cash rent in 2023 was $259. Now, when you don't own the land, you may be a little bit more hesitant to invest large amounts of money into it, not knowing how long you will be able to farm that land. And some landowners and tenants have come to agreements on funding of conservation practices, and there are resources out there to help with getting that into a lease. If you're renting the land, you also have to get the landowner's permission to install a conservation practice. And landowners don't necessarily have an agricultural background and may be unfamiliar with the conservation practices. Landscape variability also plays a role. Just as each of us is different, so are farmers and their fields. There is no field that is the same as another, so there can't be a cookie cutter plan. What works well for some acres won't work for other acres due to multiple variables, including soil type, slope, weather conditions, and climate. We live in a very long state, and so what works well in Southern Illinois doesn't necessarily work well in Northern Illinois and vice versa. And you can see the landscape variability by looking at the topographic map of Illinois on the right, and also looking at the rolling landscape on the left. Now, Dr. Morris said something in an article that also helps explain why this is such a complex issue. He says that one of the most important findings from his research has been that farmers are an incredibly diverse group of people with a wide array of beliefs, motivations, attitudes, values, and social norms that influence their behavior in very complex ways. And so this means that there's no singular strategy that natural resource professionals and policymakers are able to use to encourage farmers to adopt conservation practices on their land. So how can you help? Well, first of all, it's important to understand that nutrient loss is a complicated and complex issue with no easy or quick fixes. You can talk to and support your local farmers, find out what conservation practices they've implemented or what they might be looking into implementing. You can also advocate for increased funding to support local, state, and federal cost share programs and agencies, as well as being active in your local watershed and supporting watershed planning. Now, quickly, a watershed plan is used to identify potential locations for conservation practices for both agriculture and urban stormwater, and it provides an assessment and management information for a defined watershed. You can think of it kind of like a roadmap that identifies the problems, it sets goals, and provides potential solutions. And it's often used as a foundation to secure state and federal cost share dollars. Now, each of these watershed plans has to be submitted to the Illinois EPA for their approval. And so it's important to understand that making a plan is a very large undertaking, and it's often done by starting to submit a grant to receive funds to pay for a consultant to do most of the heavy lifting. Now, the creation and implementation of a watershed plan is a very long process and can take a few years from the creation to the implementation phase. So if you have an interest in watershed planning within your watershed or have any questions about watershed planning or agricultural conservation, please reach out to a member of the watershed implementation team. And now I will hand it over to Eliana Brown to talk about stormwater.
Thanks so much, Rachel. Next slide, please. Okay, you may be wondering, hey, I don't run a wastewater treatment plant. I don't have farmland. How can I help? No matter whether you live in a city or a small town, you can play a part with stormwater solutions. Nutrient loss impacts us all. I'm going to give you some background and explain what is being done to reduce nutrient loss in the stormwater sector. The first thing to cover is the difference between sanitary and storm sewers. Sanitary sewers take wastewater from our home's plumbing to the wastewater treatment plants that Joan talked about earlier. Storm sewers take stormwater from hard surfaces like our roofs and roads directly to lakes and rivers without treatment. Now, since we're given this webinar the week before Valentine's Day, I thought I'd show you this handy way to remember the difference. Happy Valentine's Day. I use the term stormwater. It is defined as rainwater or snowmelt that runs off instead of soaking into the ground. Anything that flows into the street goes into the storm drain and into lakes and rivers untreated, and that includes pollutants. Winter can be a good time of year to see some of the pollutants, like in this picture in the snow. And like I've been saying, this would go directly into lakes and rivers via the storm drain, untreated. And what do you think is a major source of phosphorus in urban stormwater? Next slide, please. It's autumn leaves. Now, this was studied by the USGS, and I'll talk more about it when I get to solutions. But the idea is that leaves are great on the land where they provide nutrients for plants. It's fantastic when it's there. It's when they get into our city stormwater systems that mess things up. When left on the street, nutrient-rich leaves leach out phosphorus that is carried via that storm drain, like I've been saying, on that road. So you see that the leaves are covering the storm drains are on that road, but there are storm drains there. And it's going directly to the lakes and rivers that's causing downstream water quality impacts. But there are things that we can do, and I will get to them later. I'm going to cover another part of the story. We have a lot more stormwater running off than we would have had pre-development because of all of our impermeable surfaces. What are impermeable surfaces? Those are those hard surfaces that don't allow water to soak into the ground. And when we're looking at a whole watershed, as little as 10% can result in stream degradation. And we see that combination of pollution that I talked about in the impermeable surfaces on this map of impaired waters due to urban stormwater. Note that many of these impaired waters are near cities. While the 2015 NLRS science assessment found that nutrient loss from the stormwater sector is small compared to our other sectors, we can see that it impacts our local lakes and rivers. So it's something that we pay attention to. The good news is that there are solutions that can be implemented that don't interfere with our way of life and in many cases enhance it. We can still have our roofs and roads while improving water quality and being good stewards of our watershed. The first solution I want to talk about is a suite of practices called green stormwater infrastructure. These include rain gardens, constructed wetlands, and permeable pavement. The cool thing about them is that they slow down water and allow it to soak in, replenishing groundwater, mimicking what the land was like before all of our impermeable roads and parking lots. The practices shown here are all large scale, and those were done by cities or large organizations. But they can also be done on a smaller scale. At, say, your house. Extension has the Stormwater at Home series that showcases several green stormwater infrastructure practices that were done at people's homes, including rain barrels and rain gardens. You can check it out at go.illinois.edu/stormwaterhome. And as you heard, we will be providing these links after the webinar. You may also want to check out Lawn to Lake Midwest from Illinois Indiana Sea Grant, which offers great tips to have a natural lawn. And just so you know, we do have some watershed-specific Lawn to Lake materials that were developed, and if you're interested in them, please contact Rachel. Lawn to Lake Midwest also has some really great publications, and you can see it all on their website. Another website that features stormwater solutions is Extension's rainfall management page. Within that page, I just want to mention that there is a link to the Red Oak Rain Garden, which is a demonstration rain garden on the University of Illinois campus. You can access that through the rainfall management page. And of course, like we said, we will be providing those links. And Extension offers the Rainscaping Education Program, where participants learn step-by-step how to build a rain garden. You can ask your local Extension educator about this program. I also want to mention the Illinois Groundwork webpage, which has a handy plant finder, and that's going to help you select the right plant for the right place for a rain garden if you are at that part of being able to implement solutions. Now, as promised, we are circling back to the solution for leaves. That USGS study found that nearly 60% of annual phosphorus can come from fall leaves, and timely removal from streets can reduce the phosphorus load by 80%. Now, that's usually done as part of a city's street sweeping program, but there are some things that we can do in our own yards. The first thing to do is to not put leaves into the street. In some places, that is a common practice. A lot of places have a bagged leaf program, and you can take advantage of that. That's a very good thing to do, and your local government can take care of the leaves from there. Another thing to do is to use those nutrient-rich leaves on site by mulching or composting them. See the Extension resource for more information about composting. And you can do a combination of these. Personally, I usually remove the leaves from my front yard for composting, and I leave the leaves in my backyard. My backyard, which is away from the street, so those leaves are not going to get to the street. But those leaves, I just leave them in my backyard for the overwintering pollinators. And I talked about this on episode 57 of the Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy podcast. There is a link here to the accompanying blog for that. Now, you might live in a community that has an MS4 permit, which means that they should have a stormwater management plan. This map may help you find out if you do, or you can always check your own local government's website to see if they are an MS4. MS4s are required to have an annual report for their activities. And as part of the nutrient report, Extension staff read and analyzed these reports. There are a little over 300 MS4s in the state of Illinois, so that's 634 reports. These annual facility inspection reports from communities with the MS4 permits do help us to better understand water quality and green infrastructure practice implementation. This analysis allows a more comprehensive understanding of urban stormwater management practices around the state to better capture progress towards NLRS from the stormwater sector. And what we found is that 70% of communities have street sweeping and leaf collection programs, which we know have been shown to reduce the phosphorus loads. Further, nearly 60% of them are now also requiring green infrastructure requirements in new development and redevelopment. Additionally, your MS4 may have programs that financially support installation of rain barrels and rain gardens for community members. So it may be something that you want to check out. Your community may also be part of receiving state and federal cost share programs that allow them to put in stormwater management practices. Two from the Illinois EPA are Section 319 and the Green Infrastructure Grant Opportunities. To give you some idea of the scale of these, in 2021, the Illinois awarded 11 green infrastructure grants in that latter program, totaling $5 million. Local match is expected to be almost $4 million for an estimated total project implementation cost of $9 million. Project applicants submitted annual pollutant load reduction estimates of nearly 5,000 pounds of nitrogen that's reduced, and 1,400 pounds of phosphorus reduction, and more than 31 million gallons of stormwater that's retained on site, allowing that to soak into the ground and recharging groundwater. You can find out more about these programs from our webinar. And the link, of course, is there on the page. Here are some closing tips for you. So you're trying to figure out what you can do. Practice those good stormwater management practices on your own property, including leaf management. Support and take part in initiatives by your local government. Learn more about green infrastructure and be active in your local watershed planning. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Amanda to close us out.
Thank you, Eliana. So we have given you an overview of watersheds, point sources, agriculture, and stormwater nutrient pollution sources and solutions. We hope that you found this information useful. This is a complex problem, and it's going to take everyone working together to solve it. You can reach out to Eliana or Lane if you have stormwater questions. You can reach out to Nicole or Rachel if you have agriculture or watershed planning questions. I'd also like to note that we will soon have a third outreach associate working in the Embra and Little Wabash watershed located in southeastern Illinois. You can reach out to Joan or myself if you have any questions outside of ag or stormwater. Emily is our fabulous media communications manager, so if you are with the media, you can reach out to her. Thank you for your participation and kind attention and willingness to engage. The next webinar in this series will be on March 14th, and it covers protecting our dark skies, how to limit light pollution. We encourage you to all check out our brand new nutrient loss reduction website and feel free to reach out to any of us if you have questions.